Hello everyone. This is Dr. Rachita Misra speaking to you. Today in our software engineering course, we will discuss the user interface design. As you all know, the user interface design is a very important part of the software designing methodology. So under this, we will try to introduce what is interface design, why it is important, and we will discuss what is a good interface. Because to do a good interface, we need to know what are the characteristics of the good interface. Then we'll look into the three golden rules that have been given for a good interface design. We'll look into the process that is followed, the steps, the issues and challenges that is faced. Then we will look into some of the user interface patterns, and finally the evaluation criteria. So let's introduce this concept of user interface and what is involved in it. So in the early days, when computing started by computing machines, it used to follow a batch process, and the batch process doesn't support any direct or indirect interaction with the users. But nowadays, almost every software product provides a user interface, and the user interface is responsible for all interactions with the user. Unless it is a middleware which is interacting with other software or systems, any software which will be run by the user always needs to have a user interface. So that is how it is very important. And sometimes what happens, the quality of the software is judged by the quality of the user interface, because that is what is exposed to the user. So unless the user gets a very good look and feel, unless the user feels it is efficient, he will not judge that the software is good. It is difficult to use. It leads to higher levels of user error and customer dissatisfaction. So if the user interface is not good, then it will be difficult for the user to use it. He will not be able to understand it, and there will be many user errors. And if there are user errors with the software, then customer will be dissatisfied. It is seen that out of the development time, 50% of the development time is spent on only the user interface. And if the user interface is not designed in a systematic manner, then the effort required to develop the interface would be increasing tremendously, because it has to be reworked many times. It is important to carefully study the user interface design concepts. So, because it is so important for understanding, for judging the software quality, and because it is the only portion of the software which is exposed to the user, we need to be very careful regarding this UI design concepts, and we need to understand it. We should not take, we normally many times software engineers tend to think that okay, user interface, we can make something. The user has to just interact. So they do not think many important concepts behind it. So we have to study it, and before we study it, let us examine what is a good interface. How does people really say that interface is good? Then we can understand what we are doing. So there are certain parameters which defines the a good user interface. So that is what is this parameters here that I have noted. First one is the speed of learning. So good user interface should be simple to learn. All complex syntax and semantics should be avoided. So they are not liked by the user because it takes more time for the user to learn it. Not only that, if the user interface requires that he has to memorize commands, then it is very difficult for him. And consistency should be there in the use of the command, the screen layout, the navigation. Unless there is a consistency, again it is a memorization problem, and because everything looks different, every application, every screen looks different, and should use the concept with which the users are already familiar. So if the users are familiar with a particular concept of a particular way of doing the business work, then when we design the user interface, it should follow the same one, and it should be intuitive or symbolic commands and user interface elements that are good in nature, user friendly in nature, those should be preferred. So if you do this, then the speed of learning will improve. So we should make a user interface which will be easy for the user to learn. And speed of use means that the time and effort necessary to identify what he has to do and execute, that should be less, that should be minimal. There should not be any lengthy writing, maybe selection instead of lengthy writing, haphazard placement of fields so that a person has to search where is what, the number of keystrokes he needs to do to complete necessary task. So these are things which will reduce the speed when the user interface is in use. So this we should be very careful and avoid such kind of inoptimal conditions. Then the speed of recall should be low. That means when, because he should not be able to memorize a lot of things, so speed of recall should be less. It should be in such a way that the person will remember immediately. So if you use symbolic commands, intuitive commands, then it will be easy. Or if you use a metaphor to the operational procedures, then it will be easy for the person to recall it from the memory, from his memory. Then user errors. All good user interface should try to minimize the scope of committing errors. So here we have studied why the error will come. So all such kind of problems that may create a user error will have to be taken care of. It has to be reduced. Then we come to consistency. A consistency of command is a desirable character. It reduces the speed of learning, recall, as well as the user error. So if you maintain the consistency, that means the way you have used the commands, the way you have laid it out, the way the navigation is happening, if it is in a consistent manner, then it is easy the speed of learning is high, there is no memory overload, the recall is also easy, and there is less user error. Also, there are some other things. Those were the basics. Then there are something more. It should be attractive. It should be well laid out. Graphics based user interface should be used, because text based interfaces is not attractive. It may be useful, but it is not very attractive. So over the time, the user loses interest. Then feedback. A good user interface must provide regular feedback to the user actions. Suppose, like for example, suppose a particular system is slow, then it should give a feedback. Otherwise, the user will not understand what is happening, because there is no response from the system. So if when there is a difficulty, then the user should tell that this process is on, or this will take so much time. So like that, messages should come. Faster commands. While making user interface simple for ordinary users, it should also provide hotkeys and macros for faster users. So there are some users who are more knowledgeable and they want to do their work very fast instead of doing it like ordinary users. So we should have a method for the ordinary user, and also it should support the speed of the faster users by giving hotkeys, macros, and other such tools. Error recovery. To avoid unwanted error procedure execution, there should be an undo facility. So suppose he does the error, then some kind of a recovery from the error that has happened, some minor errors, a kind of undo facility can be given. Then guidance and help. A good user interface always should provide some kind of online help and messages which will guide the user to do the operation easily. So that is one of the desirable things in a good user interface. So now that we have understood the importance of the user interface and also what is a good user interface in the eyes of the user, we can cite these three rules. That is why they are called golden rules. They're very small in number and easy to remember. This is from the designer point of view. But what the rule the designer has to, or the software engineer has to remember. And they are easily written. And if you remember these rules, then you will automatically satisfy all the good user interface characteristics that we had discussed in the previous two slides. So first one says place the user in command. So you have to always understand that the user interface will be used by the user and not the software engineer. So software engineer is only a kind of a person who is doing it. He is the means of doing it, but he is not in command of this. The user has to be in command at it. He should say what is his perception. So we should be able to get the user's perception. It is our job to get the user's perception. What is his style of work? That we need to understand for every user, and then only we can create a good user interface. Then replace the user's memory load. So we have to reduce the memory load on the user. So what we try to do is we try to design it such a way that the user has to memorize everything. That is not a good design. So we have to design in such a way that user does not have to remember steps or commands or buttons. It should be self-explanatory. It should be totally visual to him. When it is visual to him and should be self-explanatory, the way it is laid out, the labels, the messages, the help, so that he doesn't have to do memory, he can concentrate on his business and do the work. Then he will be satisfied, and so that is why it is one of the golden rules. And then make the interface consistent. So inconsistency between screens for navigation, objects, labeling commands, these create confusion. And if there is a confusion, it will create user error. So this kind of making the interface should be consistent. So having understood all these things, let's try to look at something called as interface types. Do we have different interface types or all are same? So there is something called as modeless and mode based. In a modeless interface is a state or collection of states. A mode is a state or a collection of states. In modeless user interface, same set of commands are available at all times. It is not dependent on the state of the system. In the mode-based interface, different set of commands are available depending on the mode in which the system is. Because the mode or the status of the system changes based on the input data that has been supplied to it. So also the way the commands that will be available to the user through the interface will be different. So in mode-based interface, what happens? The different sets of commands are available depending on the mode in which the system is, that is based on the past sequence of the user commands. Then in the graphical user interface, and also we have text-based user interface. Earlier there used to be only text-based interface. Now we people prefer graphical. So several windows with different information can be simultaneously displayed on the user screen by using the GUI. And iconic information representation, symbolic information manipulation, these are all possible in GUI, but they are not possible in text-based user interface. Text-based interface, the user has to patiently type out the commands. It is completely character based. This is character based or text based, and this is graphics based. And the user interface can be classified into three categories. That is what I was telling here. Command language based, that is the text based interface. It is something like a Linux editor. You keep giving the commands, they are interpreted and executed. Then there is menu based interface where you have choice based command execution. So this is again based on the GUI. And Within the GUI, of course, there will be some editor language-based interface, command languages, and then direct manipulation. It is a completely interactive direct manipulation. Then we go to the UI design process. So having understood what is a user interface, what are its types, why it is important, what are the rules, and what characteristics makes the user interface good, we will go to the design process. So what are the steps that we will follow to do the analysis and the design? Now, we have noted that this process is an iterative process. It is not a single step, but it is a set of steps which has to be repeated many times and can be developed using the spiral process. So, this spiral process model, since it gives us an iterative way of developing any activity of the software, so this UI design can be modeled by the spiral process model that is available with us. There are four distinct types of activities that are carried out under the design process. The first one is the user task and environment analysis and its modeling. Then the actual design. Then the construction or a prototype implementation, not the actual construction of the software. And then we have iteratively validation, because this is happening iteratively, so the validation is also happening many times. It includes evaluation as well as review. So we come to the first task. It is divided into two parts, the analysis part and the user analysis and the task analysis. So there are two things. One is the user who is using it, and the task that he is going to perform. So when you do the user analysis, we try to get the psychological or human factors. Since we have to put the user in command, so the perception and the look and feel of the product has to be determined by the user. So we have to go and analyze the user to understand what is his style of work and how he feels, how he has conceived the software to look like. Then different types of users for the system need to be interviewed for this purpose. And sometimes interview may not give us everything. So some well-designed questionnaire is used, which they can answer. Apart from the interview, you can also use this. It helps in getting the appropriate answer because it is formatted. So the user has to answer in a particular way, which will be useful for the analysis. The aesthetics, the usability, and other required characteristics of the user interface can also be obtained from the user's perspective. Again, we try to do either by the interview or the questionnaire survey kind of tool. Then we come to the task analysis and modeling. So one thing is that we have to understand these points. User actions for specific circumstances. This we have to get. This is what something we have to do. And it includes the exceptions also. Then tasks and subtasks for the normal functioning. And this also we have to get it from the user, understand it properly. What are the tasks and subtasks? So this is the normal functioning. This is the specific or exceptional functioning. And which problem domain objects or data entities will be manipulated when the function is performed. So within that user interface, the function is being performed as a result of some data or some command. Then what are the objects and data entities that will be manipulated? What is the sequence of tasks or the workflow, and any hierarchy of the tasks involved? This is something which we need to get from the user, and we have to understand it from the user. Then we have to take the use case description, which provide the input for items 1 and 2. So whatever we have understood from the directly from the user, more than that, we can also take the inputs from 1 and 2. For the 1 and 2, we have to take the input from the use cases. Use cases are already modeled in the requirement engineering. So, and also we can take the description part. From the description part, we can get some indication regarding regarding 1 and regarding 2, because specific circumstance, that is the exceptional path and the normal path of the functioning of the operation. Then we can go to the swimlane, which is available, swimlane diagram, which is available in the activity diagram, which is one of the behavioral diagrams. It can provide information about these two items, 4 and 5. What is the sequence of tasks or workflow? Any hierarchy of tasks involved. So these we can get it some idea from the activity diagram. Then we can get the information about object and entities from the DFD and class diagram. So this is also analysis modeling outputs, and sometimes the work environment may also play an important role. And above analysis, these kind of analysis, all these above analysis steps, they will provide the inputs to the screen contents and its navigation. In the previous one, we got the user's perception, user style, and HR kind of information. Here, by doing all these steps, what we will get is, we will get the contents that has to be placed on the screen and how it will get navigated. What are the tasks that it will be done in each screen, and subsequently what is the flow and the navigation. So these things we will know. Domain analysis, attention has to be paid to aesthetics, usability, and other required characteristics of good UI as per user analysis. So whatever we have done in the user analysis, we have received some inputs regarding these usability and aesthetics and other characteristics, or maybe performance characteristics. Then as per that, we have to take these into consideration when we do the interface analysis also and the modeling of it. Then we come to the second one, which is the design steps. So here, define the interface objects and actions based on the information obtained during the user analysis. So we have done the interface analysis in the previous step. So whatever information we obtain from that, we will take it and define the interface objects and the interface actions, the user interface objects and the user interface actions. Then we will define the events that will trigger the UI state to change and model this behavior. So whenever there is a state change due to some user action or some event, that also we will have to note it, and we will have to create the model of this behavior, the change in the state. Then we will have to illustrate each interface state as it will appear to the end user. So here we have identified the state, and here we will illustrate it, or in other words, we will model it so that end user can see and verify it. Then we have to indicate how the user will interpret the state of the system, and from the information provided on the user interface. So there has to be, in the interface design steps, there has to be enough information provided on the user interface so that the user can see those information and interpret the state of the system, and accordingly the user has to take action. And at this stage, the designer may sketch out the user interface screens and fit the objects and also the actions into it. And when he does this design steps, he should follow the 3 golden rules, and he should model the interface the way it will be implemented, not the way, whatever the way the user will want it, how it will show to the user. And it will also consider the environment for display. So 2 things will be understood: the way the interface will be implemented for the user, and also the way it will, the way the technology tools and the operating system will be used to display it. So because this is the technology involved, so the user interface will have to be, we have to be able to do it. So this is one constraint. This is one constraint which the user has to remember when he is doing, the designer has to remember when he is doing the design. So, and he has to follow the three golden rules for the user. He has to do the interface in the way it will be implemented, not the way the user will see it. Okay, the user will see it only if it is implemented, but not the. So the interfacing designing will be in the language of the software engineer. What it means is that the interface, the way it will be implemented, that means the model, the interface model, when it is created, it will be given to the developer. So it should be in the language of the developer so that it is easy to be implemented. But it will follow the three golden rules that will cater to the user's requirement. And it will also consider the technology, tools, and the operating system, which is the base for the user. Next is the design pattern. So because design patterns are usable, so at the time of design, we have to take care of these. When we sketch the user interfaces, we have to also consider whether we can use some design patterns. So we should not try to discover everything. So whenever design patterns are available, we should use, because they are ready-made solutions. This is, we have also seen the design patterns earlier, and here this is specific to the user interface, and there are many categories of user design patterns, and there are hundreds of design patterns. So I have just listed a few of them just to get an idea of how what it is. And they are categorized into getting input type, dealing with the data type, social type, onboarding or familiarization type, cognition level, that means a little higher level, perception and memory type, what is feedback type. So depending, based on each category, there are few design patterns which have been developed and released to people, to the software engineering practitioners. So here there is a card stack. Design pattern name is card stack. It is used for general organization of pages or screens. So it's like a stack of tabbed cards, it will appear. And each one can be selectable with a mouse click, and each it can be used for different sub function, or if you have contents, different categories of contents can be kept in it. Similarly, top level navigation is another named design pattern. It provides a top level menu coupled with logo, graphics, and also a navigation to the major functions. Then you have the shopping cart. All of you must be very familiar with the shopping cart, since we are doing a lot of online e-commerce activity. So that provides a list of items that has been selected. It automatically goes to a shopping cart with a graphic symbol. And simple search. This is, you might have seen in many websites, there is a search button, a place you can give some keyword and it will try to search that particular website. So it provides the ability to search one website, the current website, or a persistent data store that is associated with this website, for a simple data item in an alphanumeric string. If you give this alphanumeric string as the input to the simple search, then you can get the result. Breadcrumbs is another one. It addresses editing, data editing, modification, and transformation. Provides full navigation path for complex hierarchy of screens. So that is the advantage of using this named design pattern. Now the issues and challenges. There are many issues and challenges when we start designing. Although we follow the golden rules, we follow the process, still some things will be left out. So one is the response time. It deals with the delay and variability of response time. When we say delay, it is delay. Variability means it is not consistent all the time. Sometimes it will be high and sometimes it will be low. So low response times is good, but more response time, high response time, that is not a very good. It is not supposed to be good for the user, because he cannot predict how much time he has to wait to get the response. And then online help facility. This is another issue or challenge, because you have a choice of functions, whether it will be optional or not, what will be the help text representation, whether you will use separate window, whether you will use method of return, what will be the structuring, whether it will be flat hierarchy or hypertext. So because there are different methods you can solve this online facility, you have a challenge which one will be more appropriate and which one will be liked by the user. Similarly, we have error handling, error message language, how nicely it will be worded. Then it should be worded in such a way that it is understandable to the user. Similarly, type of advice for recovery, visibility, semantics. So these are all characteristics of the error handling message. So the way the advice will be given for recovery, and the semantics of the messages. So these are some of another challenge. Similarly, menu and command labeling, the labeling of the menu and the command, and unless if it is nowadays it is placed in the window oriented point and pick interfaces. But the problem used to be uh, from the command control sequence function keys, these typed words, these cannot be given, and there will be a memorization problem if you give the other one, command labeling. In command labeling, unless you do a menu and command labeling properly, the memorization problem will come up, because people cannot remember, and abbreviations will be required, and I'm sorry, labels have to be meaningful. It should be consistent between different menus and submenus. So there are different type of problems that we encounter when we do the menu and command labeling. Each one of is an issue, and as well as a challenge for us to do it. Application accessibility. This means that it has to cater for physically challenged people who have to be given some kind of a assistive technology to be able to operate the user interface. Internationalization. This is required because nowadays software is being used on a global as a global platform in different countries. So if it is not internationalized, then it cannot be globalized. Always internationalization and globalization follow hand in hand. So if you now don't design it for internationalization implementation, then you cannot then you cannot localize it. So the localization depends on the globalization. So if you have internationalization, it is called globalized. And if you have globalization, then in depending on which country, which language you want to localize it, you can do that. Then we come to the evaluation. So how it is evaluated? After the design model has been, so far we were talking of the analysis and the modeling in the design of user interface. So once it is modeled, the model has been complete, a first level prototype is created. A prototype can be seen by the and can be executed by the user. The prototype is evaluated by the user to get the feedback about the efficiency of the interface. In addition, if formal evaluation techniques are used, then we can also distribute some questionnaire or rating sheets to the user, and they can, in their own time, they can look into the system and give you the answer. The designer may extract information from these data, this questionnaire forms and the rating sheets. Then design modifications are made for the next evaluation. So once you get the feedback, then you incorporate that feedback and do the design modifications, and then you give it for the next evaluation. So like that, this evaluation cycle of modifying and getting feedback through testing continues until it is acceptable. Sometimes structured questionnaire are used to get users feedback. The structured questionnaire you will find everywhere in the user interface, because they are driven by the user's perspective and their preferences. Again, to get the quantitative feedback data, a time study analysis can be conducted. So that is, one is by their evaluation. We have got the inputs. The evaluation cycle continues until it is acceptable. So this prototype is being evaluated by the user. Now here what we are meaning is we want to get a quantitative feedback data from that, and this we can do it from time study analysis. So what we got previously will be more qualitative in their answers, but here we will get quantitative feedback. So during the time study, the users are observed when they are interacting with the system. So the prototype is given to the system, they are interacting with it to evaluate it. So at that time we will do the time study, and the data that will be collected are something like this: the nature of the data, number of tasks correctly completed over a standard time period, frequency and sequence of actions, time spent in looking at the display, this is the understanding part of the user, number and types of errors, error recovery time, time spent using help, and number of help references per standard time per period. So what is the evaluation criteria for the UI design review? So this is something different. So earlier what we discussed was the validation by the user. So it is like a test. They are actually running the prototype and they are testing it. But this is a different process which is called a design review, user interface design review. This is done earlier to the prototype building itself. So before you build because the prototype building goes on in iteration, it may take more time. So before the prototype is built, we can do some early UIS design model. It should not be UIS, it should be UI. The UI design model review. So as soon as the UI design models are ready, we can do the review. We don't have to build the prototype. So we can get the early feedback, which will be the feedback from the team itself. So, and it will be not a subjective criteria, but a quantitative criteria. The length and complexity of written specifications, then indicate amount of learning time for users, number of users tasks specified, average number of actions per task, then interaction. These indicate interaction time and the overall efficiency of the UI. So by using these two quantitative parameters, we can get an indication from the interaction time and the overall efficiency of UI. Similarly, based on the length complexity of the system interface, we can get an indication of the amount of learning time for the user. That is what I was saying, the learning time here we can get. Then by measuring the number of actions, number of tasks, and the system states in the design model, we can indicate the memory load on the users. And by looking at the interface style, help facility, error handling method, it will provide a general indication of complexity and the acceptability by the user. So what is recommended is that definitely we have to do the prototype and get it validated by the user. But before doing that, we have to do our own design review to remove all kinds of errors, so that when the prototype is given to the user, not many defects remain, and so less number of iterations this can be completed. So we have come to the end of this lesson. Summarizing, we can say that we have seen the need for designing a good user interface, because it is the first impression of the user, and if it is not good, then the user doesn't find the software good. In this context, we also looked into the characteristics and properties of the good user interface. So we know how the user sees the good interface. We then learned the 3 golden rules which we can follow for good user interface design. Then we looked into the steps that are required for the UI design process. and discussed some of the issues and challenges in it. Then we saw a few existing UI design patterns. So we came to know that, rather, we discussed that instead of trying to create all the design elements, we can use the existing design patterns for doing the design decisions. And also, finally, we have discussed the evaluation of the UI now for the efficiency and other characteristics by the user, and also the design review. So this is different. This is called evaluation because it's a kind of testing, and this is called review because the models are reviewed by the software engineering team itself. So thank you all for giving me a patient hearing. I hope you have now understood the importance of user interface design and how there are many ways you can make mistakes, and because the user interface is not good, your software may not be accepted. So please pay attention to whatever I have discussed in this thing, in this lesson, and do your own reading, and try to develop your skills in the user interface design process. So thank you all.